Hello and welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for coming to this session. We're across many different time zones now, and it's very happy to see all of your faces here. We're going to start the session by playing a couple of pre-recorded videos, and then we'll launch into a conversation. So without further ado, please, Carlos, play our videos for us.
Welcome to the 13th ICTM Dialogue. My name is Alexander Cannon, and I'm very honored to be joined by Hsin-Wen, Kiku, and Tasalu Hsin-Chun. We will each speak for 10 minutes in these pre-recorded remarks and then respond to each other live. We then will open up the floor to additional comments and questions from the audience. I will start by providing some background ideas and theoretical bases for our remarks, with occasional reference to my research in southern Vietnam. A vital aspect of decolonizing ethnomusicology and decolonizing knowledge more generally must include decentering whiteness. The phrase decentering whiteness appears in education studies, queer studies, and critical race theory, and is even mentioned on the American Musicological Society's Musicology Now online publishing platform. Decentering whiteness questions long-standing presumptions emergent out of the global north and identifies vestiges of white supremacy, where those in power seek to denigrate or push aside knowledge structures of those without power. There are two ways of reading the phrase decentering whiteness, differentiated by emphasis. There's decentering whiteness, and there's decentering whiteness. Many hear the first when encountering the phrase, and it raises alarm bells. Indeed, the email I received accepting our proposal to take part in these ICTM dialogues relayed anonymized remarks by one member of the program committee who expressed discomfort with my use of the term whiteness. The invocation of differences by color, the individual indicated, is not acceptable in public discourse. Quote, "In my country, it is more appropriate to refer to cultural differences in thinking/being," end quote. The individual then suggested that attendees might have similar discomfort. I relay these comments to bring this commentator's perspective into the virtual Zoom room and allow it to resonate for a moment. I also would like to respond to it. In my view, white is not the same thing as whiteness, and it's not that easy to define and pinpoint. Hsin-Wen asks in a recent special issue of Ethnomusicology Forum on decolonization, quote, "What does white mean, for example, in different histories of colonization, which do not always operate in such polarizing terms?" End quote. Whiteness, rather than white, instead offers greater tangibility for discussion. Following Ghassan Moussaoui and Salvador Vidal Ortiz, quote, "Whiteness refers not merely or only to white people, but also to the often unmarked racialization processes that leave whiteness unnoticed while producing a self-referential analysis as universal," end quote. Whiteness stands in for the assumed, the unsaid, the taken for granted, i.e. the unquestioned universal. Sarah Ahmed considers, quote, "whiteness as a category of experience that disappears as a category through experience, which makes whiteness worldly," end quote. If this argument appears cyclical, that is the point. Whiteness circulates and supports itself without us realizing it. Or worse, we take part in recycling its operations. Whiteness is an ideology, oftentimes shaping unspoken approaches to teaching, learning, and researching, including the thinking and being the program committee member offered earlier. When one passes through educational systems in the global north, publishes one's work in journals based there, and attends conferences there, one is interpolated into whiteness. We are called into assumptions of good scholarship, good practice, appropriate methodology, etc. We must question these interpolations, and many do so, as shown by the content of these ICTM dialogues. For the remaining of my remarks, I focus on decentering whiteness. Decentering, fundamentally, is a spatial metaphor, a way of reconceptualizing the world. Understood as topographical, decentering encourages us to consider the arrangement of knowledge, power, and bodies, as well as instruments, songs, sounds, and sonic environments. Decentering offers us approaches to rearrange these in more equitable ways. An element of decentering breaks down paradigms or easy systems of ordering the world so we can make our ways through it, to reassemble them. In the process, we observe how these paradigms shift. When they shift in ways we do not like, we try to nudge them in new directions. Decentering rides on the coattails of power, to decouple the links that sustain paradigms. Rather than recycle the cycles of whiteness, we divert the operations of these cycles so they unravel. If decentering serves to reorient objects and knowledge in space, we must consider the opportunities geography affords a discussion of decentering. Edward Said offers a similar observation in an extended critique of Orientalism. In his words, he seeks, quote, what might be called a decentered consciousness, not less reflective and critical for being decentered, for the most part non- and in some cases anti-totalizing and anti-systemic, end quote. We operate in this consciousness on, quote, planes of activity and praxis, rather than one topography commanded by a geographical and historical vision locatable in a known center of metropolitan power, end quote. Attending to geography, then, encourages us to consider why some of us have a great deal more agency to reposition ourselves, or rather, reposition ourselves with much greater agility and ease. Whiteness, after all, is a topographical orientation, a positioning. When deployed, it brings greater access and ease of collecting data and ordering knowledge in far-flung locations around the world. To decenter whiteness, then, what might we learn if we decenter geography in the ways that we study music? I offer an example from the realm of education. In a study of shaping citizenship in high schools in the United States, Rouzbeh Shirazi suggests that in schools, young people with transnational identities face imperialistic modes of speaking about and understanding the world. Teachers oftentimes sustain divisions between the students by identifying a fixed different culture to support a distance between us and them. To counter this division, Shirazi offers decentering Americanness as an effective, quote, pedagogical and epistemological stance that enables recognition of non-normative bodies and experiences, end quote. Greater cohesion emerges when we reject the ways the nation-state categorizes difference to support ideology, oftentimes of superiority, in approaches to teaching and knowledge acquisition. Norma Powar makes similar observations in her account of whom she terms space invaders, or those made to feel that they diverge from some kind of universal somatic norm. While Shirazi focuses on imperialism in the American context, Powar pinpoints the spectral presence of empire and colonization in contemporary Britain. What happens over there, how colonizers treated colonial subjects, their materiality, their music, their space, still has an impact over here in the UK. Powar focuses on where and how the body is disciplined and made to feel out of place, especially when marginalized invaders appear in locations where they had not previously been admitted. Powar pinpoints, too, the disorientation or sense of unease felt by those in power by the invader's presence. Whiteness appears here with attempts to exclude space invaders and recapture comfort. A kind of recentering occurs to combat the decentering undertaken. We must resist the move to obstruct Puar's space invaders, as their presence offers opportunities for positive change by decentering our positionalities and forcing a reorientation of topography. What spaces, then, enable exclusion? One might be ethnography, or the ways that ethnography clips, sutures, rationalizes, translates, and orders life histories, musical experience, and knowledge to fit fashionable theories or common narratives. Another is the bounded nation-state, around which many of us continue to categorize our work. The centripetal forces of national identification pull ideas and ways of viewing the world towards similar modes of organizing knowledge production and maintenance, obfuscating realities on the ground. This remains true of where I do my work. When I first arrived in southern Vietnam in 2008 to start my PhD fieldwork research on Đơn Ca Tài Tử, a kind of southern Vietnamese traditional music, I was advised by the dean of the anthropology department at a major university in Ho Chi Minh City to đi ra Hà Nội, go to Hanoi to learn about it. How could traveling 1,200 kilometers away from the performance spaces associated with this music help me to understand it? Southern Vietnamese music practitioners of Đơn Ca Tài Tử do not reify what it means to be Vietnamese when they play, and they certainly do not look to Hanoi. Instead, they seek camaraderie with the diverse peoples of the Mekong Delta, engaging with and remapping the long-standing sounds that circulate. Over the course of an impromptu evening concert, one might hear a Chinese tune, a Khmer Krom tune, a tune from Central Vietnam, an excerpt of a French chanson deposited in the Mekong Delta in the 1930s, and Stephen Foster's O Susanna, most likely left by an American soldier in the 1960s. Musicians celebrate the cultural uniqueness of the Mekong Delta and the circulations of musics along the water routes that crisscross ethnic enclaves and national borders in the region. Indeed, a borderlands of sorts emerges outside the management of the state, where people, goods, and ideas flow down the Mekong and Basak rivers and through the numerous tributaries. Replete with shifting meeting points, individuals constantly need to confront feeling out of place, which in turn generates very prolific musical expression. Is this a center of sorts, or is it a perpetual state of decentering? In Rachel Harris's recent ethnography, Soundscapes of Uyghur Islam, she observes the political and cultural borderlands of the Uyghur people in East Turkestan, or Xinjiang province. Ever on the periphery of Chinese and Islamic positionalities, Uyghurs learn to absorb, assimilate, and regenerate new ideologies and practices. Rather than establish a new center through sound, they practice sonic slippages in performance, full of discrepancies, but with incredible effective power. The most gripping and powerful music does not align, and we should not force it to do so. Our panel therefore makes the case for the borderlands, meeting places where identities and affiliations do not align fully with pre-existing categories, where so much of the world's music is made and continues to be remade. These borderlands are our field sites, but they also should be our academic homes. We need to reconsider our geographies, but perhaps even more so, we must reconsider the terminologies we use when we engage with sound in Asia. Decentering, as I've described it here, encourages us to explore what is produced, what is created, when space, time, bodies, materials, sounds, ideologies, and histories become unhinged and fall out of place. How might constant unmooring generate agency? My fellow panelists take up the case of the borderland in all of its physical, virtual, and transnational manifestations in more detail. We seek to engage decolonization and further decentering by foregrounding perspectives of inhabitants of the many borderlands folded into the fabric of music practice in Asia. Thank you.
Thanks for Alexander's introduction. My name is Hsin-Wen, and I am an assistant professor in ethnomusicology at National Taiwan Normal University. Today, I'm honored to team with Alexander, Kiku, and Hsin-Chun in sharing thoughts on the ways the studies on the borderland music in Asia can contribute to the discipline of ethnomusicology. I will present a case study on Taiwanese Christians' musical contextualization for promoting Hakka mission. In so doing, I aim to respond to Alexander's call for scrutinizing provincial experiences of engaging ideologies accepted as universal, and I will share my experience of working together with marginalized subjects in achieving shared goals. I will start with addressing the background in which I conduct this research, through which I aim to pave a foundation for reconceptualizing primordialism and authenticity, two ideologies that are often taken for granted in ethnomusicology and thus deserve a discussion of decentering. Hakka music has been a major research interest of mine for 2 decades. The music has been regarded as a unique expression of Hakka people. In Taiwan, Hakka people comprise around 15 to 20% of the total population. Scholars of Hakka music in Taiwan have adopted early theories of Hakka origins and assume that Hakka people is an ethnic group associated with Han Chinese. According to Luo Xianglin's theory, Hakka people originated from the Central Plain area of northern China and migrated to southern China and overseas for a better life. Such discourse, alongside media discourse and the institutional initiative that supported the awakening of Hakka consciousness since the 1960s, facilitated the institutionalization of certain music practice such as Hakka folk songs, Hakka tea-picking opera, and Hakka paying instrumental music in the realms of academia, music industry, social participation, and cultural policy. In these organizational processes, the ethnic association of this music practice and practitioners was predominantly emphasized over other characteristics of them. Significantly, in recent years, scholars in Hakka studies, especially historians, anthropologists, and sociologists, have shifted interest from the origin and cultural traits of Hakka people to the historical and social constructions of group memories, and they have focused on analyzing the myth behind the constructions. Despite the constructive turn in Hakka studies, however, few scholars of Hakka music have questioned the preoccupation of primordialism in their studies, which stress the deep historical and cultural roots of nations and nationalism, and assume their quasi-objective characters. In addition, even though scholars of Hakka music have explored regional and individual differences, authenticity as another preoccupation was still prioritized or taken for granted in their analysis. Being a descendant from both Hakka and non-Hakka ancestors, I treasure the Hakka heritage that I inherited, and I identify myself also as a Hakka people. However, I am aware of the various factors that shapes the heterogeneous compositions of my identity and modes of thinking and behavior. In addition, in my research journey of Hakka music, many musicians I encountered also disagree stereotypes ascribed to Hakka people, and some of them aim to use compositions and performances to counter existing stereotypes and express their idiosyncratic ideas about Hakka music. As a result, although I recognize the significance of pursuing uniqueness and genuineness in the studies of the humanities, I choose to suspend the preoccupations of primordialism and authenticity and pay more attention to distinct construction of ethnicity and interpretations of authenticity. My recent studies of Hakka hymns and gospel songs in and beyond Taiwan furthered my consideration of the notion of Hakka music more as a borderland crisscrossed by a plurality of languages and cultures than as cultural stuff that activists aim to enclose with clear-cut ethnic boundary. By boundary crisscrossed by a plurality of languages and culture, I do not mean the making and performance of Hakka hymns and songs involve different vernacular forms or musical idioms. Rather, by this metaphorical expression, I aim to emphasize such a musical phenomenon can be viewed as a domain intersected by multiple subjectivities and aesthetics. Alongside the expansion of international mission in the mid-19th century, the adaptation of existing and the creation of new hymns and songs, as well as the translation of the Bible, played a significant role in the dissemination of the gospel across different parts of the globe, wherein theologies were communicated mostly through local languages and understood through particular cultural context. Produced and circulated also for missionary purposes, Hakka hymns and songs in Taiwan, from a perspective of decolonization, might also be viewed as a tool for approaching and converting non-Christians, which have similar function with medical and social work services. What made the case of Hakka hymns and songs worth of attention, however, is the decentering implications with which the production and circulation of such texts and derived performances are associated. In hindsight, the production and circulation of Hakka hymns and songs in and beyond Taiwan result from the development of Hakka mission. When Presbyterian missionaries came to Taiwan to disseminate the gospel in the late 19th century, they target Holo people as well as the indigenous peoples in missionary work. Even though missionaries noticed the existence of Hakka people, who were also termed as Han Chinese, but spoke different language with Holo people, they didn't pay attention to Hakka mission. Because missionaries at the time found the young Hakka tend to speak the majority languages rather than their own language. Missionaries assumed Hakka languages were likely to disappear, and the Hakka would eventually be assimilated by the Holo. It was not until the 1970s Hakka mission received institutional attentions alongside the growing publicity to Hakka consciousness in Taiwan. Since the mid-1980s, a series of Hakka hymnals, gospel songbooks, and music albums were published by not only organizations exclusively dedicated to Hakka mission, such as the Christian Hakka Evangelical Association, but also major denominations such as Presbyterian Church in Taiwan and the popular non-denominational church such as Bread of Life Christian Church. Under the promotion of individual Hakka Christians and music groups, some tunes selected from these anthologies have been performed and even become popular in churches across Hakkaphone communities in Taiwan, Hong Kong, Singapore, Malaysia, Indonesia, and elsewhere. In addition to the process of production and circulation, the texts and the performances of Hakka hymns and songs also convey decentering implications as they present multiple subjectivities and aesthetics, which challenges primordialism of Hakka ethnicity and authenticity of Hakka music. Here, I would like to showcase a performance of two famous Hakka hymns and songs presented at a concert hosted by Fu'an Mennonite Church on November 28, 2020. The first song, titled Full of God's Grace and performed by Zhang Kaihui, a Hakka Christian from Sabah, Malaysia, was adapted from a non-Hakka gospel song of the same title. Composed by Li Xinyi and You Zhiting, two founders of Stream of Praise, a Taiwanese Christian music group based in California, this song was meant to be sung in Holo language. The lyrics of the song depict the environment of Taiwan and praise the mighty God who created the beautiful land. The song has been popular in churches across Sinophone societies that the Hakka version, which was adapted by Chen Jianzhong, was collected in Hakka hymnals and widely performed in Hakka mission. The second song, titled Bringing the Gospel to Hakka Villages, was adapted from Mai Jiu Ge, Song for Selling Wine, a traditional Hakka folk melody associated with tea-picking opera. The lyrics of the song was written by a famous Hakka pastor, Fan Bingtian, and it calls for the dissemination of the gospel to Hakka villages and Christians' praises of the mighty God. The performance exemplifies the ways Hakka hymns and songs can present multiple subjectivities and aesthetics. Even though the songs were sung in Hakka language, and the second song even adopted Hakka folk melody, the performance conveys a message that Hakka Christians can share similar aspirations and anticipations with non-Hakka Christians, and they expected the same grace from God. In addition, it shows Hakka hymns and songs can express multiple identities of Hakka Christians, some of which are even shared by non-Hakka people. Furthermore, it shows Hakka hymns and songs are not merely music of Hakka people. Lastly, it shows composers and performers of Hakka hymns and songs can embrace diverse musical and performative styles. Thus far, I have problematized the preoccupations of primordialism and authenticity in studies of Hakka music, and discussed the decentering implication of Hakka hymns and songs. I would like to conclude by considering the possible ways an ethnographic work can benefit our research subjects in achieving shared goals. I once wondered if an ethnomusicological research of a non-Christian can really contribute to the discussion of a significant theological issue and benefit its Christian research subjects. In preparing for this presentation, I'm having a feeling that the answer is yes, because the research does not merely aim to achieve my goal of exploring the diverse musicality and creativity of human beings. It also shares the goals of my research subjects in negotiating with normative structures, sounding silenced identities, and contextualizing Christian practices. In analyzing the social-cultural meanings of Hakka hymns and songs, I hope this study can benefit its research subjects by adding a humanistic perspective to their theological concerns. Thanks for your attention. I look forward to feedbacks from participants and my fellow presenters.
Hello, my name is Kiku. First of all, I want to thank the committee involved in organizing these dialogues. They've been very important contribution to our field, I think. And also thank you to Alex for organizing this panel. My presentation here will be based on observation from the Shakuhachi community, in which I place myself as a performer and teacher, active member in terms of event organizer, co-founder of the European Shakuhachi Society, and as a scholar as well. The shakuhachi is, as many already know, a Japanese vertical bamboo flute, which used to be played by mendicanting monks called komuso, monks of nothingness, who were members of the Fuke sect, supposedly a Zen Buddhist sect, abolished in 1871 during the modernization process in the late 19th century by the Meiji government. In my shakuhachi case study in relation to decentralization and borderlands in ethnomusicology, I will touch upon who owns or controls music studies and the knowledge of, in this case, the shakuhachi, and who gets to dictate what is right and wrong. And I would also like to look into from where we need to decentralize, where is the center, and how do we connect shakuhachi scholars better. The shakuhachi has since the 1960s expanded its territory, crossing geographical borders as well as cultural borders, and have become the most successful Japanese instrument outside of the country, together with taiko drumming. One of the main reasons for this success is actually the fact that the shakuhachi has a very strong Zen Buddhist connection. A book called Kyotaku Denki Kokujikai, documenting the history of the shakuhachi back to the Tang Dynasty, China, and which have been used to grant the Fuke sect recognition by the feudal Tokugawa government and all these kind of things, but the book has since in the 20th century been proven to be a forgery. It is a narrative put together to receive privileges from the government, such as monopoly on the playing of the shakuhachi and the ability to cross borders in Japan for those mendicanting monks. And also the privilege not having to state their identity at checkpoints, but only to state the temple at which the player belongs. Lately, in Western academia, scholars of shakuhachi have made a U-turn regarding the shakuhachi and its connection to Zen Buddhism, to not having a connection at all, and that it was all a Western invention imported to Japan. One of the scholars that have contributed to this is Max Degg, a scholar in religious studies. He published a research paper on the Fuke sect, which is a very important paper and a very well-researched paper. But it starts something off. I'll put the quote there. This is the last paragraph in the conclusion, and I'm interested in the highlighted places where he writes that paradoxically, in Japan, this assumed spirituality was lost in the more and more secularized and formalized world of Japanese shakuhachi practice of the main schools. And also, he writes that this shakuhachi connection to spirituality was constructed in terms of consciousness of it, retransferred as this has been from the West as a spiritual Zen instrument. And this world retransferred, Degg somehow initiated an attitude shift away from white scholars, so that it didn't have a Zen background. I find it quite interesting that the white academia has changed from this general acceptance of the spiritual background to now it's not. It's also an assumed spirituality. And when Degg writes that, the more and more secularized and formalized world of the main schools, it's true. Because the main schools are indeed secularized and formalized. And they are having a music focus. They're part of the conservatory system. And the players belong to the Hogaku world, so the professional Japanese traditional music world. They're supported by the government, culture foundations, etc. But it seems like these Western scholars, they haven't gotten to the fringes or the borderlands of the shakuhachi. And that is indeed players with this spiritual focus. And after the abolition of the Fuke sect and the begging was prohibited for 10 years in 1871, they have been loosely organized in what they call the Myoanji temple. And they're a group of people continuing this spiritual tradition, you could say. But in Japan, they have been frowned upon as mere amateurs, eccentrics, playing out of tune, since they don't play on shakuhachi tune to Western pitch and intervals, and completely ignored in the Hogaku, or traditional Japanese music world. So they are in the fringes or the borderlands of the shakuhachi world, ignored in Japan, ignored in white academia. Although there was in 2014 a PhD thesis that came out on this group from SOAS. This is in some ways, somehow I find it identifying this white supremacy that in the way that it shapes the shakuhachi narrative into a mold that fits the current trends in ethnomusicology while ignoring lived musical experience by these players. So, of course, it's not black and white, and there is truth in the statement of, the reimportation of Zen Buddhism as it is presented in the West. And there was a creation among Japanese intellectuals to add Zen Buddhism to some kind of a national self-image, and this has, of course, also influenced the narrative in shakuhachi. However, there are plenty of evidence that the shakuhachi was played with a religious aim during the Edo period. Whether or not the sect was recognized as an official part of Rinzai Zen, and also it is still quite an important part of a lot of shakuhachi players today. So by kind of dismissing this spiritual aspect, we are really ignoring a part of the shakuhachi that has been important both inside Japan and outside. One interesting aspect is the discrepancy in academic research on shakuhachi in and outside Japan. So this is probably not quite accurate, but it's a list of PhDs with shakuhachi focus that I've done. From this list, it's clear that there are many more shakuhachi PhDs outside Japan than inside. We have at least 2 Japanese names in that's not highlighted, but they produce a PhD outside of Japan, and I myself is only half Japanese, and I never went to the school systems in Japan, so I am Danish and my PhD is from England. So there are 3 shakuhachi PhDs in Japan. There were 4 Western shakuhachi PhDs before the first Japanese one, and none of these 3 write or read in English, and so there's this gap. How do we connect these players together? And even the attitude in Japan, Tsukitani Tsuneko told me that when she was to choose her master thesis, the subject of her master thesis, her teacher told her, if you want to study something very, very strange and weird, why don't you study shakuhachi? So it doesn't have a high status in Japan when it comes to scholarly work. I'm also editing an anthology on research on shakuhachi at present, and it's very hard to find contributors from Japan. So in trying to answer some of the questions I asked in the beginning, I find it clear we need to decentralize from this Western academia, although it is here the largest production of scholarship about the shakuhachi is. The problem is also, it depends on what you're writing about, but it seems like there's a lot of reproduction of what is said, and many of the shakuhachi PhDs do not really speak Japanese and have learned shakuhachi from Western players. And it would require more of a two-way communication between scholars in Japan and elsewhere in order to, for example, not ignore the whole group just because they are in the borderlands of the Japanese traditional music world. In order to move the study of the shakuhachi forward in a decentralized, non-Orientalist direction, with a shared ownership of knowledge. It is my hope that we can translate the anthology and stimulate students to see value in the research of sexuality also in Japan. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us to discuss how we engage with sound in Asia when decolonizing ethnomusicology is the primary concern. My name is Desirability, and I would like to first draw your attention to one disciplinary movement emerging in East Asia at the turn of the 21st century. That time saw the vibrant networking in ethnomusicology and musicology within this region that concerns the music studied of its own territory, defined broadly in both geographical and musical sense. It emerged from nascent area studies with the notion of decolonizing against the proverbial Western musical academia into now a crucial forum for developing multiple inter- and intra-disciplinary subjectivity. In 2016, the overlaying theme East Asian ethnomusicologies was raised in the ICTM study group of East Asian music to highlight the possibility of its inclusivity. We were also reminded that fault lines continue to be drawn, even as new bridges span the boundaries of different kinds of academic intersectionality. Today, I'd like to visit some fault lines found in this disciplinary movement by drawing on my case study conducted in Taiwan. I'll focus on Borderlands music, a long neglected area of study in Taiwan, and explore how its sounds and ideas are regimented by the presumptions born out of the ethnic politics in Taiwan's music scholarship. I'll explain how this group from the Borderlands area has shaped their musical performance within Taiwan's essentialist norms while negotiating the presumptions imposed on the production. These presumptions, other than those of Western academia, might also remain implicit but influential in the East Asian ethnomusicologies, obscuring music realities on the ground. The first presumptions I'm addressing concerns the typology of music. Since the 1970s, Taiwan's music scholarship has sought to classify the music around the ethnic identification rooted in Taiwan's demographic structure. Specific music genres and styles are presumably ascribed to each monotypic group that is pre-ethnicized, such as Taiwan nose flute music. However, my case study appears to oppose the clear-cut ethno-cultural attributes in Taiwan's presumption. It is a military-based community that fled from the Thai-Myanmar borderlands. They were primarily Han Chinese from Western Yunnan, the southern western province of China, later joined by a diversity of cross-border highlanders such as Gogan Han Chinese, as well as ethnic Bai, Li Su, Jingpo, and Bai Yi, mostly wives of these soldiers. Later, this group arrived in Taiwan through 3 official withdrawals and settled in Taoyuan's veterans' housing. In the ensuing decades, the vibrant transnational flow of peoples and music ideas and styles between the Golden Triangle region and Taiwan has diversified the musical scene. Among the diverse musics, Dage is the most prominent dance form and has now been coined as the cultural marker of this group. It is a generic dance form transnationally diffused in the Borderland region and shared by these cross-border ethnic groups, literally singing and dancing together. It is typified by its performing style, in which dancers proceed counterclockwise in a circle, led by instrumentalists who join in the dance steps. By no means monotypic, It presents an enormous variety of musical styles, dance movements, costumes, and rituals, with each form offering an insight into the culture of its ethnic origins. The Dage style thus never fits into a rigid ethno-cultural label. However, when this community first saw the social recognition of their Dage in the 1980s, the particular type brought out by a specific Han Chinese group, Zhenkang Dage, was molded into one specific genre known as Yunnan Dage. Certain performing styles, dance steps, and the narratives of song meanings were all tailored to stand for one music genre that they felt was more ideal to represent themselves to outsiders. The public image of Yunnan Dage is made to associate this group with Taiwan's common ethno label, Yunnanese Han Chinese. This label is derived from the administrative division of China when the mainland was under the Republic of China's control, defined provincially but not culturally. But whether all these community members identify themselves as Yunnanese and consider Zhenkang Dage as representing their culture is still debated. Here, I pinpoint the long-standing set of presumptions held in Taiwan's music academia even until now, in which certain music genres are organized, classified, and ethnicized around the respective social groups. Yet, the notions of music genres and ethnicity might be highly political and questionable. All requires meticulous examinations in its local contextualization. I argue that although the state establishes ethno-cultural borders, the borderland culture molded out of the daily practices and the historical fragments does not fully ascribe to these demarcations. As it evolved in recent years, Dage performance has undergone what I call the gorgeous turnaround. A blending of Dage components from different ethnic groups has been incorporated into the old style to make it sound ebullient and look enchanting in Taiwan's current tourism. Let me play you a short video to demonstrate this. This change sheds light on the ongoing transnational flow of Dage ideas and styles taken from different parts of the Golden Triangle region that continue to diversify and disrupt this community's Dage culture. This speaks to the unsettling condition of a borderland culture, as described by Chunmin Ha, that creates a hyphenated entity, refusing to settle down in one world or another. Thus, the ethno-cultural demarcation, as well as the essentialist notions of authenticity and cultural ownership in Taiwan's music scholarship, might hamper the understanding of a complex agency that is always interactive, relational, and contextualized in action. The second set of ethno-political presumptions to decolonize is the Han centrism and its related norms. Although Dage has been practiced in public on a weekly basis since its revival, this musical form received very little ethnomusicological attention. Instead, Musics of other Han Chinese, such as the two Taiwanese majority populations of Holok and Hakka, making up 84%, as well as those KMT settlers from the central plains of China, Zhongyuan, have been the primary subject of music studies. Same as these central plainsmen, this borderland group of my study was also referred to as Taiwanese mainlanders, 外省人, denoting those KMT Han settlers who came to Taiwan after the political split from the communists. However, the culture those central plainsmen carry with has been treated superior as they consider the central plains the main cradles of modern Chinese civilization. On the contrary, the Dage performances from the borderlands have been disdained as culturally primitive under the geopolitical preconception that the peripheral peoples were the barbarians who are not deserving serious study. Their music expressions and performing styles were destined rough and vulgar, inferior to the plainsmen's civilized genres, embodying the sophistication and the elegance of the literati. Such prejudice prevails in some accounts from interviews with ethnomusicologists today. This can also be seen as an extended form of music supremacy emerging within the ethnomusicological education. This supremacy might be held by most ethnomusicologists trained in either Western classical music or the modernized Chinese traditional music education. This speaks to a paradigm based on the dualism between the musical us and the others. Those distant or the unsophisticated musical others, such as Dage, are considered hard to appreciate and deeply experience. This might explain why the first thesis on Dage completed in 2010, and perhaps most Taiwanese indigenous music studies were all conducted with a more scientific, systematic, and objective approach. To conclude, Taiwan's recent ethnomusicological term at the regional level has not yet recognized these long, locally grounded essentialist norms, such as Han centrism, the dualism of musical us and others, as well as the presumptive notions of genres and ethnicity, which I believe might also be influential in the making of East Asian ethnomusicologies. As a subject of area studies, my case group can be positioned geographically in the borderlands of East Asia or within this region. The fault lines between the borderland music studies and the East Asian music studies might appear at any level when it comes to understanding how people's quotidian music making interact with the ethnic, national, and the regional grounding. I suggested that one can adopt a historical ethnographic approach to tease out the entangled divergent discourses embedded in the social and political histories at the different levels. This enables the researchers to decolonize hegemonic presumptions. Then the focus of study can be drawn back on the musical entity that informs complex agencies, viewed as what is experienced, performed, and dialogically understood in the process of music making. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, for your kind attention to our presentations. What we will do now is present some responses to our presentations. I invite all of you to turn on your video if you want. And after we make our responses, then we will open up the floor to questions from the audience. So I will start and reflect for just a couple of minutes on some of the connections between our contributions. Our panel describes certain parts of the world, the Golden Triangle, for instance, the Mekong Delta, as borderlands. But we also consider borderlands in the highly centralized zones of our discipline and in the geographies in which we operate. What are the productive and generative insights that emerge when considering locations such as Taiwan or the UK as borderlands? The commentary of the panel further suggests a curious contradiction in the operations of ethnomusicology today. On the one hand, we oftentimes reject claims of authenticity, sometimes for good reason. Kiku mentions the forgery that ties the shakuhachi to Tang Dynasty China. Claims of authenticity emerge too as branches of national or nationalist ideology with no grounding or little grounding in oral history or textual documentation. We instead study myths of authenticity that Hsin-Wen pinpoints and the, quote, shaping within norms, end quote, that Tusaw mentions. At the same time, however, we strive to support Indigenous peoples with origin and original claims to land, and we oftentimes draw on North American scholarship to support the language of such an approach. How do we reconcile then the two, the sort of questioning of authenticity and the supporting of original claims to land? I think decentering whiteness comes into play here. It's not my place, for instance, to decide. Indeed, the story relayed by Kiku about the secularization of the shakuhachi among Western scholars should give us a great deal of pause. Instead, I think scholars should collect stories and positions and allow them to resonate in their work. All of us on this panel, I think, do this. And if certain stories do not reconcile, then so be it. In a location of shifting positionalities, or what Tusaw describes as topography with, quote, complex agency that is always interactive, relational, and contextualized in action, end quote, certain ideologies and belief systems cannot be reconciled. Borderlands are not fixed entities, but well-traversed, sometimes purposefully hidden, and constantly are reconstituted by inhabitants and travelers. As Kiku points out, there are many doors that lead in, out, and through these borderlands. This is really a wonderful metaphor. And we cannot ignore them. To ignore the borderlands is to silence its inhabitants. If we remain engaged with the location of these doors and how swinging them open and closed causes shifts, there is a place for the ethnomusicologist to engage with the people and positionalities of the borderlands. Perhaps there is even a place for the ethnomusicologist to advocate for the power of the borderlands. Hsin-Wen, for instance, suggests that a non-Christian can certainly research Christian music making and even make contributions to theological debates. We might even suggest that the inhabitants of the borderland do not need to re-centralize themselves in order to represent themselves in a uniform way to outsiders, as Tusaw offers. This kind of advocacy brings us into further dialogue, I think, with the musics that we study and the people who have welcomed us into the borderlands. I'll now turn to Hsin-Wen and ask him to provide some additional remarks and commentary.
Thanks, Alexander's comments. Here, I would like to share a little bit thoughts to promote further discussions later. First thing that I want to mention is also the similarities across our presentations. I would like to draw on the notion of borderlands. As we have presented, there are different layers in the notion of borderlands, different ways of conceptualizing borderland music. Our presentations also show that borderland is not merely about those who were colonized, but have relevancy to many of us who are dealing with subjects that are not regarded as typical borderlands or the periphery. For example, although in Tusaw and Alexander's case studies, we can they discuss a group of musicians who are situated in a concrete geographic borderland. But they in their cases, they also talk about, for example, in these borderlands, there are cultural encounters, constant cultural encounters, and which make the Roms not easy to be defined by any kinds of standards. I think Kiku's case provide us understanding that a borderland can be a realm of different marginalities and the process of many negotiations. And my case, which I would like to emphasize, is a group of people who are not usually defined as the peripheral, can also be related to, can be also studied through a decentered approach. As I have presented in the case, in the enterprise of ethnic movement, Hakka people is not actually regarded as the peripheral and the marginalized people, because in contrast of them, the indigenous people may be situated in a more marginalized status. However, in the enterprise of ethnic mission, Hakka Christians still need to strive for legitimacy and recognition. And this may remind us that the status of being marginalized or peripheral is relative. Hakka was not regarded as the most marginalized group, but it is still silenced in the early enterprise of ethnic mission, and it is because of their status of vagueness. So I think maybe one implication that the decentered approach reveal is that we need to explore those people who were situated in the status of vagueness, and try to highlight the silenced identity. Lastly, I would like to mention or discuss the issue why we want to emphasize, or we need to emphasize, the decentered approach. As Kiku said in her presentation, one of the goals is to connect scholars of different approaches and with different perspectives better. I think the decentered approach is not such researchers, and we need to
See when you're falling out.
Chronically and diachronically.
We can't really hear you.
Mm.
I think we've lost Hsin-Wen. There's a monsoon hitting Taiwan right now, so that might be affecting the internet connection. We'll see if we can try to get him back. Kiku, would you like to start your commentary, and then we can come back to Hsin-Wen after?
Yes, I'll do that. Although I won't be as well spoken as all these my panelists. I'm like the disorganized one, and I first of all want to apologize for that. I put the wrong picture, the quote on the video, so I'm sorry about that. And also, I would like to for simplicity, I called it white scholarship or white academia, but obviously it's also talking about going into what Alex spoke about, how he defined whiteness, and also about the global north. So it was very interesting to work with the panel here, because we do somehow. Well, Hsin-Wen is back. Shall we just get him to finish?
Kiku, why don't you continue, and we can
Yes.
come back to Hsin-Wen after.
Okay, right. So this shift in the Shakuhachi scholarship is something that have really surprised me, and it is. I think it can happen because we do exclude certain bodies, as you said, Alex. In this case, it's the bodies that create sounds that we don't like, and we can easily understand or accept or find it nice to listen to. And of course, there's the ideology part as well. So this group, Shakuhachi people, they don't really align with the pre-existing mainstream way of thinking of Japanese traditional music. And I also like the way that you spoke about authenticity, and in the quest of trying to find authenticity, the right, perfect, or at least the correct authenticity, we forget these lived experiences in the fringes. And also the fact that the people in these borderlands, in my case, these shakuhachi players, they remain silent. And that also connects into what Hsin-Wen was talking about, the group members of the marginalized, how they are behind the constructions, they remain behind in some ways. And the Shakuhachi group, this group, Myoan group, they have remained really silent. They've done their own thing, and they always had the attitude that people who need to come, they will come. But obviously the Shakuhachi population, the popularity is falling and falling and falling everywhere, but especially in the borderlands. So there's a little shift now, and that also connects into Tasao's. You talked about visibility, the newish leader of the Myoanji temple, at least the musical leader. He's very different, and he's just opened a YouTube channel. He's got these kind of aims, trying to use the new technologies to get out, and that's like the first time. So I'm kind of looking forward to see what does it do when these borderlands, the people start to kind of use elbows to get out there and get seen. How are they? How would that again change? First of all, of course, shakuhachi players around, both in Japan and outside. And how can we understand that these people have also been molded into a cultural label? The shakuhachis, after its entrance to the hogaku, professional shakuhachi, professional Japanese music world, how it's become a stage instrument with very impressive skills. That's very different from these people, and how would people then react to this, you could say, dichotomy of professionalism and amateurism? So yes, and of course, like Tasao also talked about, the no attention from scholars. That is quite interesting. So I think I will stop my a little bit messy talk here. Thank you.
Messiness is good, Kiku. Hsin-Wen, would you like to finish up your remarks?
Sorry for my being offline because my poor connection. I actually just have one idea. I would like to maybe after Tazao's comments, we can discuss this. I want to raise one question. That is how we can highlight music research more as a social practice by emphasizing the decentered approach of in studying the Borderland music. My initial concept is that it is not enough that we just relied on our reflexivity. It's not enough to grasp the so-called emic perspective or to win insiders' recognition or to admit our bias and the preoccupations. I think it's also important to explore how an intersubjectivity between researchers and research subjects. I think maybe I can share my experience of doing my research on Hakka hymns and gospel. That is, although my research subjects know that I am not Christian yet, so I appreciate about to participate this kind of a missionary work, and they also grant me very detailed account of their ideas and their plans. I think maybe the point is for us to just to write down ethnography that I try to write down what I understand from interaction with them. But the point lies in the collecting the process that I have been involved, and the collecting empathy, a term I borrowed from Professor Guo Pei, also an associate fellow of Institute of Ethnology at Academia Sinica, in which she described the kind of concept, concept of empathy in the Solomon Islands. And she emphasized that for Solomon Island people, the Langa people, it's difficult to understand or to get the idea of others, but it is important to think or feel along the others. And I think only through this co-acting or working together, we can be closer to the intersubjectivity that can benefit our research and also our research subjects. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much. Tasa, please.
Yeah, my comments will be rather short because when I was reading and watching my fellows' videos, I've been thinking in a reflexive way. I've been thinking that there have been a lot of ethnographies that have been talking about decentering. So, in other words, the decentering practices have been not a new thing. So, when we talk about the sounds in Asia, I brought up the construction or the shaping of the area studies to the music of East Asia, to pinpoint that these kind of decentering, which have been trying to go against the Western academia, has been developing since decades ago. So in that case, why we are talking about decentering now again? So this is what I've been thinking. And when I saw the 4 case studies, and I got a very concrete conclusion that actually the practice of decentering in our field it's a developing process. And so we have been creating many new, like a hegemonic new centers, which probably we are not aware of. So for example, probably in Kiku's case studies, when she mentioned about the shakuhachi, the conception of shakuhachi to connect the notion of spirituality of Zen Buddhism. So to construct the Western construction of Zen Buddhism, and she connect to the locally grounded discipline in Japan. So when we think of the remapping the discipline, or what I call the disciplinary movement now, which has been developing everywhere in our field, we have to try to recognize and try to think of what are the core to connect our disciplines together, at the same time to see what is the disconnectedness in that kind of bridge. So the main thing my own case studies to bring out, just to see the Borderlands, in my case, is very concrete because it's it's actually confined in a geographical area, but I actually take it as a metaphoric sense, and I think all of my fellows do, and we try to see the borderland. This concept of borderland can be positioned in any levels. When we talk about the disciplinary bridges, when we talk about the different connections between musicians, or when we talk about how we understand between the researchers and those musicians being researched. So my I don't really have a very good conclusion, but I just want to say the idea of decentering for me is in a process, and we need to dig out and try to go back to different points of the history, because the practice in our field, when we talk about decentering, is not actually linear. There are many non-linear practices or non-linear notion of decentering coming out. So what are the fissures between those ones? I think that's for of our presenters as a whole trying to bring that. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tasal. I have a lot of new questions that are coming to mind out of your remarks, but I think at this point we should turn to the audience that we have here. I would like to invite you all to pose a question, pose a comment. You can do so in the chat. You can put your question or comment in the chat. You can raise your hand, and I'd be very happy to call on you to have you ask a question or present your comment. You can also put in the chat that you wish to speak, and I can call on you that way. Again, feel free to turn on your video if you'd like to take part in the conversation, and we're looking forward to hearing from all of you. Whilst we sit in the awkward silence, Tasal, could I ask you to expand on your idea of the gorgeous turnaround? And connect it to I think the last comment that you were making about about decentering and the use of metaphor.
When I talk about the gorgeous turnaround, that term, I want to emphasize on the turnaround. When I was positioning this idea in my case studies, the turnaround is positioned in a way which the Borderlands people, they have been creating a culture according to the context which they are in. Especially I adopted the idea from that idea, I'm so sorry, it's Robinson. So Professor Robinson was talking about post-frontier. So the idea of post-frontier, he's actually mentioned about and pinpoint that many cultural practices have been happening in the borderland areas. But at the same time, when it comes to performing a culture, it is confined in one national demarcation. So the same group, it might perform a culture in one place different from the other place, but they are the same. So when I say the term around, actually I'm talking about this kind of musical practices which seems there the ownership of culture, and also they don't really have a sense of authenticity in the case, because they are the group itself is multi-ethnic composed and also multi-language composed. So that's why the turnaround means metaphorically the culture has been shaping in a fluid way. So it is flexible, especially according to the context they are in. So the turnaround also talking about the negotiating process. So the complex agencies, when I talk about use that term, why the agencies is complex and it is plural, because the group itself, it always has different ideas and the different cultures pulling in when they try to perform their culture and try to represent themselves to others. So the turnaround, it's a kind of trying to say that this metaphorically, it is represent the complex agencies to make it turn around. That's what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, that's great. It's in one of our previous conversations about this concept, I focused on the gorgeous part, and because I was thinking about making gorgeous, the aestheticization, the change that happens, but also so I was focusing on that. But then your discussion of turnaround here, sort of the turnaround of representation. How that itself can be gorgeous, can be aesthetic in some way. So I just really like this concept because I think it in some ways I think it answers at least it's one way to answer Sui Beng's question about how can ethnomusicologists change their ethnographic research approaches to decenter whiteness, constantly turning ourselves around. Thinking about the impact that we have just by being there, but also the kind of impact of sort of multimedia items, the internet, music videos coming out of the West primarily have on aesthetic practices, and how that causes things to turn around in some way or get people to represent themselves in different ways. So studying that, questioning that, keeping that always in the back of our minds as we're doing ethnography is important. I mean, it's hard to do research. We have to juggle a lot of different things. But sometimes if we have kind of one or two things that we just constantly come back to, whether it's, decentering or whether it's the gorgeous turnaround, that might, in many ways, help us. So we have another question from Katie Cisco in the chat. How important is the development of local programs in ethnomusicology important to the project of decentering? I'd like to invite panelists to respond to that.
I can start.
Okay, Kiku.
Kiku, please.
Yeah, I mean, I think it is very important. However, you have to ensure that there is a decentralized attitude locally as well, because ethnomusicology is present in Japan, but as I said, shakuhachi for some reason is not highly regarded. Plus, I mean, the Japanese academia also have taken on quite a whiteness attitude, I would say. I mean, I do find it interesting that, Tsukita Nitsuneko, that I also mentioned in my talk, she is like the first Japanese scholar who's done research. There are lots of amateur researchers, and we're very indebted to those amateur scholars who've digged out a lot of especially historical documents and things like that. But Tsukita Nitsuneko is even also a woman in a very, at the time, masculine world. And when she went to do interviews and to record the music that she would analyze, she had to tell them that she does not play the shakuhachi, otherwise they wouldn't share with her. They didn't really understand. Anyway, so ethnomusicology programs is of course very important, but we need also everybody to have this decentralized attitude, I suppose, and try to include more people.
Many so I want to share a thought about the institutionalization of ethnomusicology. I mean, of course, it would be great to have more local programs in ethnomusicology, maybe in higher education. However, we can also we have many of us have been aware of or even experience the impact of neoliberalism on higher education, especially in humanities. And it becomes more and more difficult for disciplines like ethnomusicology to find more resources. Thus, I was thinking about experience of Finland, in which actually, sadly, the departments in higher education have been highly centralized at arts university. And in comprehensive universities, there are less and less space for ethnomusicology. So I was thinking maybe it's also time for us to think about different kinds of local programs in ethnomusicologies. For example, NGO, what kind of NGO we can have that promote ethnomusicological goals and the purposes. I think it's possible if, even though there are less and less positions in some countries, there are less and less positions in ethnomusicology. There are still many people who want to devote their efforts to this discipline. And I think we need to think about to decentering the notion of local progress so that we can maybe get more ideas about how we can use different ways to promote the mission of this discipline. Thank you.
I wanted to jump in too with an observation. I mean, decentering, we're advocating for this, but Hsin-Wen brings in the reality, the sort of neoliberal reality in which many of us operate, where there is not a lot of money for what we do. In the UK, it was announced this week that funding to the arts at universities is going to be cut 50%. Because it's not deemed a high priority for the government. They're going to put their money into STEM instead. And so, we can talk and we can advocate for decentering, but if we don't center in some way to try to advocate for the arts generally and ethnomusicology specifically, we could lose all of our funding. So keeping the neoliberal reality, as much as we don't like it, to some degree, we have to keep it in mind. The other quick comment I'll make about sort of designing and thinking about programming, we, in line with our advocacy for the borderland, I think we need to move farther away from teaching within certain geographical boundaries. Many of us do teach classes that are titled Music of Southeast Asia, Music in China, music of South America, music of Africa. And I think in some way we don't always do justice to these musics by kind of pigeonholing them into these constructs. We can think collectively as a discipline about how we teach these areas, how the people with whom we are interacting on the ground see the world, and design classes from that perspective, rather than from the, let me take you through Vietnam and show you all these different musics that are there among a very diverse array of people, which again, I'm not sure we're doing justice to that, to those musical practices.
In response to Alex's comments, I think actually the COVID situation helped all of us the role of technology to enhance remodifying the curriculum for ethnomusicology, or even some kind of programs.
Hsin-Wen, could you repeat that? You cut out in the middle.
Yeah. Okay. Sorry. I was saying that maybe the COVID situation actually forced us to think about the role of technology in uniting our efforts for modifying the teaching in ethnomusicology.
Agreed. I mean, there are many. I think there are lots of conversations that we need to have about how we can deploy technology, as we've done over the past year, or many of us have done over the past year, and how we can reshape how we teach and what we teach.
Can I come in about Hsin-Wen's questions? Where she writes or ask about how can ethnomusicologists change their ethnographic research approaches in order to decenter whiteness, and also if we can comment a bit about a relationship with the people that we study. So just in my case, I kind of study my own group. I'm kind of a normal group member in that. And it has its advantages and it's got disadvantages as well. But I mean, connecting this to the technology thing that Alex and Hsin-Wen was talking about. For example, we have right now the European Shakuhachi Summer School, as we call it, and normally we'll invite like one new player from Japan, but technology actually really enables us to go in and find the people in the borderlands, people that are not well known, and make a simple video of their playing and explain style, and take that in. So yes, technology do that. I mean, for how we can change our research approaches, I mean, it's I think certainly that lived experiences is very, very important, and not try to give people a voice. So I'll just stick with that and see what my co-panelist will say.
Tasal, did you want to comment?
I was thinking of the earlier question. I was going to say the local programs. In Taiwan's case, it's quite interesting that since there are many ethnomusicologists or musicologists who have been trained or get their PhDs from different parts of the world, so different kinds of knowledge building paradigms have been developing in Taiwan throughout different programs. So I can see they are building different programs which are centered in their own ideologies, in the sense that, for example, in the North, the local programs try to bridge the musicology and the ethnomusicology to try to delve into the building of Taiwan's music histories. So historical perspective, which has not really taken in a very important role in building Taiwanese history, Taiwanese music history, but by cooperating cooperating with the musicologists in Taiwan, they try to see the connectedness between Taiwan as a core of the music with the neighboring countries. So that is a local program in the North they have been trying to do. But in the South is rather different, because some of the ethnomusicologists, they got their PhDs. They were trained in European countries. So and their studies focuses more on the Taiwanese indigenous music. So they have been trying to build a program which focuses more on the notion of indigeneity. So trying to bridge the discipline in a way which they can connect more with the Australian ethnomusicology or Switzerland, which is like Austronesian region as a whole. So I can see different mapping of this discipline, which we don't really call it ethnomusicology in Taiwan now. We try to take out ethno, or some of the programs, according to the scholars who their specialization, they try to bring more or trying to bridge more with music and the other performing arts. For example, like music and dance, or music in a geographic area of study. So more talking about the sounds in an environmental area. So so in Taiwan, at least, I can see more and more very, very interesting and very vibrant movements in decentering the wideness, if we say. Yes, that's.
Thank you for that. I mean, there are some really wonderful connections between what you said, your previous comments, as well as I think a couple of the questions in the chat. You know, it seems to me that in the context of the Borderlands, when these fault lines open, they open in different ways in different contexts. And new kinds of bridges or different kinds of bridges need to emerge to bridge these fault lines, to generate some of these connections. And so those bridges, or to use Kiku's metaphor, those doors are going to be different depending on the context in which you're operating. And I think you've described this in these different programs. I mean, looking at Rick's comment, he mentioned that ethnomusicology potentially emerged from a decentering moment when ethnomusicologists moved away from historical musicology. But we don't always need to hold on to that these days. I mean, Tassal, as you mentioned, we build bridges in certain parts of the world with our musicologist colleagues, and perhaps even we dispense with the ethno prefix altogether and just exist as musicologists in order to be better attuned to the local conditions in some way. I'm thinking too about a comment that you made in your remarks about East Asian ethnomusicologies and who gets to sort of decide, what sort of an East Asian ethnomusicology is. So I think, yeah, I think your perspective on East Asian ethnomusicologies in the region is going to be very different than mine as someone who works in the UK and was educated in the US. You think about this, I think, in much more thoughtful ways than I do, being someone from outside of the region.
Alex.
Yes, please.
Professor Tang Sui Bin has another question. So should we also respond to that? Can we comment a bit about the relationship with the people we study?
Please.
My situation, I have actually mentioned just a little bit because I am not a Christian yet, at least yet. So when I work with my research subjects, I appreciate they kindly treat me as a member of them, and I always work with them in a missionary work as a pianist. But I think it's a question that I may not be answered directly, but I think the decentered approach will help me, or have helped me to reconsider my role in ethnographic research. For me, my previous research of Hakka music, actually, I am more like just a documenter, just a documenter. I document what I saw and what I met in my journey of research. But in this new case, I think in my participation in this missionary work, I also I have to think about how I can contribute to them, not just my own, achieve my own goal. But on the contrary, my participation also also helped me to reflecting my belief. I mean, it's not just about my personal religious belief, but also about my belief in academia. Because I am sort of aware there is a disjuncture between theological concern and humanistic concern. The latter, I feel, is more about highlighting the human creativities, while the former highlights the God's words or the theological issues. But after I discussing this difficulty that I encountered with my colleagues, I found maybe the challenge doesn't lie in different epistemology, but lies in different approaches between my research and the previous research of Christian music. And in thinking about the common goals I can share with my research subjects, I think these differences doesn't hinder me from doing research, continuing my research, because maybe my efforts can also contribute to their negotiation with normative structures that they encounter. I probably didn't answer Professor Dam's question, but I think I just want to maybe share my experience and to provocate further thinking. Thank you.
Just a short comment from me. Also regarding how to decenter. What I noticed with the shakuhachi research done, and this is obviously mostly from outside Japan because there are not that many researchers in Japan, it's also there's a limitation to what they seem to discover or they seem to find important, so they don't seem to go into the borderlands unless they somehow happen to go there and started studying the music of what I have here called the borderlands. So that's one interesting aspect of what can we cover as ethnomusicologists as well. How do we make the borderlands more visible for all of us so that there can be more research created around that, so that it also becomes a valued thing. And I think the face of ethnomusicology anyway is changing slowly, so pushing in that direction.
I'd like to bring in two other questions, and they're two additional comments that align with one another. Rick's question about desirability and de-centering, and then Susanna's comment about ethnomusicologies in the plural. Rick asked, in the presentations today, it seems that there are decenterings that are more desirable than others, and who decides? And a further question is, what kinds of whitenesses are we trying to decenter? Sort of whiteness in British ethnomusicology, whiteness in American ethnomusicology. These are big questions, and certainly, we need events like this to sort of take part in conversations to try to forge alliances. To approach some of these questions. I certainly don't want to be the one to indicate who decides, or certainly I don't want to be the person who decides. I think they are ongoing collective conversations, as Stasal and also Rick mentioned as well, that sort of these processes of decentering have gone on for a long time. And then Susanna's question, are we still practicing ethnomusicology Should we be adopting the term ethnomusicologies instead? Certainly through these dialogues, I have learned that there are many different approaches in different parts of the world, looking at the sort of collaborative efforts of our South American colleagues. A couple of days ago, I was in a workshop with students from Wits University in South Africa who approach ethnomusicology very differently than I do. To Saw's comments about East Asian ethnomusicologies. So, I mean, there's a lot of, there's a rich arena for discussion here. And so please, if anyone would like to add additional comments, keeping in mind that we have 8 minutes remaining in our panel. Susanna, would you like to add something? You've put your video on very kindly. Sorry to put you on the spot.
No, thank you. I think it's a wonderful discussion, this one. I think all of us are feeling the same, no? Some a little bit uncomfortable with the name of our discipline, and looking back to the history, we always have the same history, which is a very wide history, but it is the history that is written in the book. So we have to try to promote a dialogue between this history and the local ethnomusicologies. And of course, everything should be changed through the practice, I think. I think is the practice who give us the tools to change the discipline. And I think we even when we compare our practice with the anthropological practice, I think we are in very good conditions to think and to influence other disciplines, because the material with which we work is always changing. So of course, culture is always changing, and we are now discussing even the concept of culture. And but every music is the activity around music is so human that it is giving every day new tools to rethink our discipline. It's completely different of working with funeral rituals, for example. Okay, we are musicians also, so we are very close to the field. We are and when we practice ethnomusicology, or we practice what we practice, and we include people from the field in our team, we arrive to a very incredible universe of rethinking what we are doing. So I think we can even give some examples to other disciplines, and going out from our small field and try to influence the other human and social disciplines, because we have a lot of tools, more tools than the anthropologists, for example. I believe in this.
I do too. Absolutely. Thank you so much.
Thank you for promoting this discussion, wonderful discussion.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We have 4 minutes left. So I would like to invite my fellow panelists to make some very brief concluding remarks so we can finish on time. Kiku, please.
I didn't think about any concluding remarks, but I mean, with the 4 presentations, I think it's really highlighted that we still are in the process of working on this, and you know, Tina asked a question, how I see the bridges between past and contemporary scholarship, and I must admit, for myself at least, I think we're in the middle of moving, so I can't really say anything clever in that sense. But I find that our panel has been really important for that process. So thank you to everyone.
Hsin-Wen, final.
Yes. Okay. Thanks. I would like to thank ICTM Dialogues and to organize this series, which sort of realize what I said, the power of technology in reshaping our discipline, and also make a platform for our collective efforts to rethink decentering approach. In response to Tina's questions, I do think it's difference from between comparative and the decentered approach. I think maybe the former emphasize more to building up a theory about cross culture. But I think it needs a longer space to discuss these differences. I would like to thank again Alexander's efforts to organizing this panel, and thanks all the response from the participants. Thank you.
Thank you, Simone.
Mine is very short. Just thank you so much. And yeah, time is concerned. So yeah, and thank you all the panelists, my fellows. And we have a wonderful discussion, and that really brings a lot of inspirations back to my own research. When I every day when I think of how to build up a theoretical frame, at the same time in practice when I go and dance with my circles in the community. I mean, both of them for me, it is so metaphoric in a sense that it always brings back to me that we need to find that space which might be fissured, but at the same time, it might be not organized, not structured, but at the same time, it gives us more like inspirations for us to think of the connectiveness and the disconnectedness. Thank you.
Great, thank you. And thank you, I'll add my thanks too for everyone, to everyone for coming. Thank you, Carlos, for hosting us. Thank you, Sui-Bang, for your leadership on this initiative. And please stay safe and play well, everyone. Stay safe and stay well, everyone. Play well too, if you can. And we'll look forward to seeing you at future events. Thank you.
Thank you.
See you in an hour.
Thank you.